Everyone. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's webinar, which is all about the power of those PSAT scores, understanding what those scores mean, so that information that you're going to see on your score report, talking about the role the PSAT plays in the National Merit Scholarship Competition, and then perhaps most importantly, how you can use those scores in determining those next steps in college admission. So, talking about the role that standardized tests play. My name is Kathy Hart, and I am your presenter this evening. Now, as always, we are broadcasting over our social media channels. We are making a recording of this webinar. So if you have to leave early or you want to rewatch this, you can view that at your own pace and time on our YouTube channel. And we do have a number of excellent downloads available for this webinar. Now, you don't need to have those in front of you in order to follow along with my presentation, but they'll provide some additional information as to what I cover this evening. Oh, and by the way, if you are watching this webinar as a recording, those same downloads are going to be available in the YouTube description. So look for them there. So as we get into tonight's presentation about the PSAT and college admission, I will not be able to view your questions live, but I do invite you to drop them in the chat as I'm going through the presentation. And don't worry, at the end, I'm going to come back, check out all those questions, answer them, and I'll also provide my email in case you have any follow-up questions. All right, so let's get started. So when we're looking at those most important factors in college admission, the SAT or ACT scores are going to round out that academic component of your college application. Now, college admissions officers are not going to see those PSAT scores, but as you're going to see through tonight's presentation, those scores are a really good launching point to start thinking about testing in college admission. So I would be remiss if I didn't briefly talk about our test optional landscape. And indeed, in response to the pandemic several years ago, many colleges adopted test optional policies. Now, some colleges are starting to walk those back or already have returned to test required, but indeed, many colleges have still maintained those policies. And just so that students understand, a test optional college doesn't mean test blind. So, in most instances, you have to be a bit strategic in determining whether or not you want to send test scores. And just to be aware that without that piece of the application, those other parts are going to take on a little bit more weight. Now, I know that a lot of students and families who are attending this webinar or watching the recording are probably younger students because, of course, we're talking about the PSAT. And you might want to know, well, which colleges are test optional? How do I find out this information? Well, of course, you can go to the college's own admission site. But this great nonprofit, fairtest.org, does maintain a running list of schools, test optional, test free, test required. So a great resource. Now, we are a Florida-based company. We work with a lot of students, both in the state of Florida and outside of Florida, who are interested in applying to our 12 state universities. Those colleges all do require the submission of an SAT or ACT as part of your application. For my Florida resident students who are looking to achieve the Bright Future Scholarship, that scholarship also requires the submission of test scores. Just briefly, these are some of the colleges that had been temporarily test optional in response to the pandemic. And they have since gone back to requiring scores. Not on this list is Auburn University, which is a very popular college that our seniors are applying to. They have been very strongly test preferred for the last several years. Next fall, if you are a current junior, so you'd be applying fall of 2026, you will need to submit test scores in order to receive a decision from Auburn. And Princeton also recently announced that it's going back to being a test required school starting in the fall of 2027. So if you're applying for admission fall of 2028, for this year and the following year, they will remain test optional. And these policies are updating, and sometimes colleges have already announced those policies for the following year. Other times, those don't get released until spring or even summer before those college applications open. So, just to be aware that it's never going to hurt. And in fact, it may, in fact, will be a plus factor to have a strong set of scores. So, that takes us to the PSAT. And again, colleges are not going to see or use your PSAT scores, but they are a really good starting point when thinking about testing for college admissions. So, what are some of the benefits of taking that PSAT or when you took it in October? And by now, everyone who took the PSAT in October should have those scores back. The last score release was last week, the 13th, November 13th. So, first, it's a great way to prepare for the SAT. You're going to see that those tests are the same when it comes to timing and number of questions, and the way that the content is organized. You're going to see on your score report a predicted SAT score. So the PSAT is a great way to anticipate future SAT scores. And what we're going to discuss later in tonight's webinar is also going to be chatting more about how you can use your PSAT to maybe decide to take an ACT or try an ACT. The PSAT also gives you some good information about your academic strengths and weaknesses, allowing you time now to improve those areas of weakness, not only for a future standardized test, but in those academic classes that you're taking. For juniors, the PSAT is going to be the main way in which you are going to enter and potentially qualify for that National Merit Scholarship competition. More on that later. And of course, after taking the PSAT and future tests, you will start receiving lots of information from colleges. All right, so let's take a look at those scores and understand what information you can see in your score report. So, there are actually three ways in which you can see your PSAT scores. My audience tonight might have received those scores in one of those three ways. But the information that students are concerned with, that colleges are looking at, if you're working with a test prep tutor, that they might be asking you about, are going to be these three main scores. So you're going to get two scale scores. You're going to get a reading and writing score. You're going to get a math score. Add those two together, and that's going to give you the total score. Now, the PSAT and the SAT have a common score scale, but because the PSAT is a little easier, those scales are going to be lower. So, just a quick comparison here. If I'm an eighth or ninth grader, my PSAT, those two section scores are going to range between 120 and 720. So I add those together to get my total score. That's because that PSAT is going to be the easiest, right, of my grouping here. Moving on up, as I'm a 10th or 11th grader and I'm taking that PSAT 10 or the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, which is what they call the PSAT 11, that is going to be a more difficult test. So that scale is going to be a little bit higher. And then finally, if I take an SAT at some point, many of our students will sit for a school day SAT sometime in the spring of their junior year. That scale range, that score range is going to be higher because it is a bit more difficult. Now, let's talk about that score report. So, the first way that you may have seen your scores was if you signed up to get the Big Future School app, and you would have done this by giving your cell phone number when you were signing up for that school day test. This is going to give you a nice, quick, easy way to get those scores. You can see that total score. You'll see those two section scores. You'll also get information about colleges and scholarships and other college related opportunities. And what's nice is very convenient is you'll get a text message when your scores are ready. Now, just a heads up that if you take an SAT outside of a school administered test, so you take one on one of the Saturday test dates that I'm going to show you, you will not get your scores on the app. You're going to have to log into your College Board account. Now, some of you may have received your scores from your school counselor. This usually comes as a PDF. Sometimes it might even be printed out. And on the PDF, you're going to start seeing a bit more information than you would see on the app. And there's going to be two sections. There's going to be a section that pertains to the test, and then there's going to be some career information specific to your state where you took the PSAT. So let's look at a sample PDF score report. And I'm going to talk about some of that information. And we're going to revisit it a little when we look at the sample online score report. So coming over here to the leftmost side is I'm going to see a breakdown of my PSAT score. So I'm going to see the 1120, which is my total score. And then I'm going to see my reading and writing section score, my math section score. So I add those together. That's how I get the 1120. And then one of the questions that's pretty common, and we'll come back to this question throughout the presentation, is what makes a good PSAT score? How do I know if my score is good? So that's going to all depend. But one of the ways that you can start measuring your score, comparing your score, is by taking a look at these percentile comparisons. So I'm going to see my 1120 puts me in the 75th percentile. So if I come down and read the fine print on my score report, I'm going to see the percentiles represent the percent of 11th grade test takers from the past 3 years who scored the same as or below you. So again, we're not looking at the students who took the PSAT in that same test window, but we're going back several years. I can also see a score range, meaning if I sat for the PSAT again on multiple days, what could I expect to score? And I'm going to see those similar pieces of information for those two section scores. Looking at this middle part of the score report, this is going to be these knowledge and skills performance bands. And it doesn't tell me, it gives you, I would say, a snapshot of those academic pieces that the PSAT is measuring. Unfortunately, it does have its limits. It doesn't tell you the total number of questions that you answered. It doesn't tell you how many you got right, how many you got wrong, but it does give you some idea of what you might need to strengthen. So for instance, I can tell here, for my reading and writing, I overall did pretty well. But when I come down to my standard English convention, so those are going to be questions related to sentence structure, to grammar, things of that nature, punctuation, I can see I need to do a little bit of improving. So perhaps I might want to do that in general to improve my writing in my high school classes, or if I'm taking a future PSAT or SAT and I want to improve upon my current score, this could be a good area to start studying. Likewise, for the math, we're going to see those 4 content areas. And while I'm overall pretty strong in algebra, might need to brush up a little bit on my geometry and my trigonometry. So again, I can know what I need to do to prepare for a future test. Now, coming over here, I'm going to see the NMSC Selection Index score, talk about this in a few moments and give you the breakdown of how this is calculated. But what this tells me is because I'm a junior, a US citizen, and I took the NMSC as a junior, I've met entry requirements for the National Merit Scholarship Program. But this does not tell me if I've qualified, if I'm competitive, if I'm going to be named a semifinalist in the fall of my senior year. This just tells me I've met the minimum entry requirements. Just a quick side-by-side comparison for your SAT PDF score report, because sometimes students will have a copy of this, and you're going to see the exact same information that you saw in your PSAT score report, minus the selection index score. All right. And then the third way that you can access those PSAT scores, and this is probably going to be the most common way because this is how you're going to be able to see your SAT scores, both school day and national. If you're taking any AP exams, this is also going to be where you find those results. You're going to go onto your College Board account, and most students create one when they are taking that PSAT or SAT. It's pretty easy to navigate. You find your recent test and you click on it and you start seeing a lot of information similar to what we saw both on the app and on that PDF, right? So you're going to see that total score. You're going to see the breakdown between the two section scores. You'll see that NMSC selection index score. So fairly easy to navigate and understand. You also will see some additional percentile scores, and this may all depend, on where you took the test, but you can compare your score, potentially your PSAT score, to your school's average, to your states, to your districts, to your countries, to the total number of students taking the test. So you can really dig deep here, and again, kind of answering that question, what is a good score? When you're looking at those section scores, you're going to see some of that same information that you've seen on those other reports, but you're also going to get a little bit more insight. So coming over here, we're going to look at, you'll see the same information for the math. We're just going to look at the reading and writing as an example. So I'm going to see that total score of 620. And the good news is I've met a benchmark score for this particular version of the PSAT. It's a 460. When I take the SAT, perhaps I'm a junior, so when I take my SAT in March or April, this is going to be the benchmark score for reading and writing, a 480. So that just tells me that I've met those minimum requirements, or that predicts or that indicates that I should be successful in a first year college reading or writing class, or English composition typically. I can also see that score range again. That tells me if I'm going to take the PSAT in the future, what I might expect to score. And notice that is a pretty broad range there, 590 to 650. And earlier I mentioned how the the PSAT can help you predict those SAT scores. Well, you're going to see for the total score and for those two section scores an estimated SAT range. So this tells me I can potentially on the reading test score between a 590 and a 700. So depending on my college list, that 700 might serve me better. If I'm applying to less competitive schools, I might be okay with a score of around 600. So again, it's going to all depend there. All right, let's look at those knowledge and skills bands and how they appear on the online score report. So we're looking at math. And what's going to happen here is you're going to see, again, a performance score band for each content domain. So the more of those rectangles that are filled, that means the better you did, the stronger you are in that area. Now, again, you can't see actual test questions. You won't know how many you got right, how many you answered incorrectly. There are links there. Now, when you click on the links, it's going to show you the skills and a few sample questions in the next score band. So if you want to advance, so right here, I'm almost at the top of that algebra score band, right? So if I clicked on this link, if I was on my online score report, I could see example problems that once I understand how to do those, or problems like those, kind of think bigger picture, more concepts, right? That might help me improve my math score for either a future PSAT or for an SAT. Just quickly to talk about those content domains. So for reading and writing, there are four content domains, and you're going to see the breakdown of how you did on each of them on those score reports. SAT has always been very reading intensive, right? Even the math word problems require a pretty good level of reading. So the way that your SAT and your PSAT reading and writing is going to be a little bit more heavy on reading questions. And then, but still a good amount of questions, just under 50%, are going to pertain to writing skills. Don't worry, you are not actually writing anything on a PSAT or on your SAT. And then each question belongs to one content domain, and then you can expect to see questions from all domains. Likewise, on the math, there are four content domains with each question belonging to one content domain. Now, PSAT and SAT math has always been very algebra focused. There's a little bit of geometry, as we saw on our sample student score report. That was an area that the student should work on for a future test. And what's nice about the PSAT and the SAT is there is a built-in calculator, a Desmos calculator, and also a formula sheet. There are some additional features that you'll see on that online score report. You can see links to practice questions, Khan Academy. You want to sign up for the SAT, there will be a link for that. You'll see some AP course recommendations, and of course, get lots of information about colleges and careers and scholarships as well. Speaking of scholarships, let's spend a few moments talking about the National Merit Scholarship, because the PSAT, taking the PSAT your junior year, is the main way in which you are going to enter that competition. So, what determines if you're going to qualify is just going to be that selection index range score. So, how do we calculate that? We're going to double the reading and writing section score, add it to the math section score, and then divide by 10. So get rid of that final zero. And my selection index range is going to be between 48 and 228. Now, just a heads up that students who are competitive for the National Merit Scholarship are going to have those selection index scores on the higher end, so closer to that 228 than on the lower end. And this is determined by state. So let's talk about the steps in the National Merit Scholarship competition. So it starts in the fall of your junior year. As a junior, you and 1.3 million of your other junior friends all sit for that school day PSAT. And not until April is NMSC going to identify those high scores. They'll send those names to high school principals so they can confirm that those students are qualifying. And those are going to be the students that are going to move on, in essence, in the competition. So now we're talking about September of your senior year. 34,000 of those original 50,000 are going to be notified that they are commended students. The competition, they're not going to continue on in the competition. But this is a still nice recognition to include on your college application. September of your senior year, you're going to be in the middle of applying to colleges. 16,000 of those original 50,000 are going to be notified by their schools that they are National Merit semifinalists. Again, that's going to be based on that cutoff score. The cutoff for Florida for this year's senior class, so my seniors who are moving through this process now, was 219. We don't have that number yet for our current juniors, but it's usually about the same, likely a little higher. And then most of my students are going to find out in February. Oh, and by the way, the steps in this, when you're named a semifinalist, You're going to have to submit a supporting SAT or ACT score. You have to write an essay, send your academic record. There will be someone at your high school who will give you guidance as you work through this process. Keep an eye for those deadlines and make sure that you stick to them. And then in February, most of those students are going to find out that they are finalists. And in March, just under 7,000 students are going to be named National Merit Scholarship winners. And there's an additional just under 700 students that are going to possibly receive some scholarships, even though they weren't merit scholarship winners. So we're talking about a very, very, very small percentage of students who are going to make it all the way and become a merit scholarship winner. So again, we're just talking about a very, very small number of students. So it's a very, very tough competition as it were. So for most students, the national merit isn't going to be a factor as they are moving through the college application process, but the PSAT is going to be, again, a great jumping off point to start thinking about what about college admission testing for admission, for scholarships, for special programs? How can I use my PSAT scores to start thinking about that pathway? So let's start with perhaps the most obvious is the PSAT and the SAT. And these are the conversations that we have with our students, with our juniors after they've taken their PSAT. I'll sit down with them and I'll say, what did you think of the PSAT experience? I mean, of course, we'll look at scores and we'll look at those score reports, but did you like that it was digital? Were you comfortable with the timing? If so, following the SAT path may be a good recommendation for you as you're making those college application testing decisions. And what's really great about the PSAT is it's exactly the same format, the same number of questions, and the same timing as the SAT. And what you're going to see is you're always going to start with the reading and writing section. It's divided into two modules. After you complete both those modules, you have a short break. And then you take the math section, two modules, and you're going to notice for each module, same timing, same number of questions. And embedded in each module are going to be two pre-test questions, so future PSAT, SAT questions, and these will not be scored. The PSAT and SAT are also adaptive and they're section adaptive. So what does that mean? So again, we talked about that each section, reading and writing and math, have two modules. When you take that first module, you're going to notice a broad array of difficulty in questions. Some are going to be easy, some are going to be medium, some are going to be hard. Depending on how you do in that first module, you will either receive a second more difficult module or a second easier module. And then that scale score, so I've showed you the scale score for the SAT. Remember, for the PSAT, that scale score for each section is going to be a little lower. But that score is going to depend on the number you got correct, the level of difficulty. Did you answer questions? Did you get the harder module for your second one, or did you get the easier? Students, one of the concerns that we had when the PSAT and SAT went digital a few years ago were students going to be overthinking the adaptive nature? Was it going to be problematic? And it's not. It really isn't. Additionally, the PSAT, as I said, is not used in college admissions, but it's an excellent predictor of SAT success. And also the SAT and ACT are the second most important factor in college admissions outside of those courses and grades and overall upward trend in grades. All right, so we've come to the point this evening that we will talk about college admission and start digging a little bit more deeper into SAT, ACT. So, how are SAT and ACT used in college admission? Well, first and foremost, when you submit a score, even to a test optional college, the score will be reviewed as part of your application, and it falls under that academic umbrella. Now, of course, and you'll hear this from the colleges, that what you do, 3 years in the classroom, because when you're applying to college, you'll have final grades from 9, 10, and 11. You will still submit your senior year schedule, but you will likely not have any senior year final grades yet. But your SAT and ACT uh, still offers a good data point, and you'll hear a lot of colleges say this, that is a good predictor of success in college. So, first and foremost, when you submit scores as part of your application, they are reviewed. They're also used in other ways that sometimes students are aware of. So sometimes for the financial aid, if you have a higher SAT or ACT, you may receive more grant aid that you don't have to pay back versus loan aid. Talent-based scholarships. So these are those merit scholarships. There are some colleges out there. I think Auburn's one of them. Alabama's one of them, where you can find these online grids, and you can see if you have a certain SAT, ACT score, certain GPA, what might be a merit scholarship that you could potentially receive. Honors programs too might want to see or strongly encourage the submission of a test score. And if you're a student who is looking at one of those very selective BSMD programs, BSDO programs, for instance, and there's some other ones like that, many times those colleges, even though the college may be test optional for admission, so if you just wanted to go in, study biology, no interest in that program, you might be okay to apply test optional. But if you want to apply for one of those special accelerated programs or an honors program, sometimes those schools require tests, even if they're otherwise test optional. So always make sure you read the fine print there. What about placement in freshman classes? What does that mean? So, your SAT and ACT can also determine, am I going to start out in college algebra or college calculus, or do I need to start in perhaps an intermediate math class before I can advance into college algebra? Same thing for the English class, or literature, college composition. So just to be aware that the SAT and ACT scores can also serve as those placement tests. Otherwise, schools might use something like AccuPlacer or Alex or one of those, which are pretty common, and they might still require those even if you've submitted an SAT and ACT. But just to be aware that those scores can be used in multiple ways in addition to admission. Returning to that question, what makes for a good score? So on my screen right now are those national average PSAT and SAT scores from the previous school year. So every year the College Board puts out a report at the end of the school year and gives the breakdown. What are the national average? So of course, grade 11, 10, 9, and 8, those are going to be PSAT scores. And then this is the national average for the SAT. So this can give you some understanding. How does my score compare when I take that SAT, or when I took my grade 11 PSAT or my grade 10 PSAT? How did my score compare? Just as a side by side, and I'm going to discuss ACT scoring momentarily because it's a bit different. The national average ACT composite score was a 19.4, stayed the same from last year, with the SAT and PSATs up just a little bit from the previous year. Now, ultimately, what makes for a good score, right, is going to be what the college is looking for. So, our Florida state universities always publish the mid 50% SAT, ACT every fall. Usually it's right around August, beginning of September, for those students who started that same fall. So if I'm a student who is looking to apply to UF, UCF, FAU, this is a great piece of information that I can look at my PSAT scores. Again, I know the scale is a little a little bit lower, but I can look at that predicted SAT score, and this can, help me determine, okay, how do I fall? Am I going to be competitive for admission? Now, of course, grades and other factors are going to be part of your application, but this is a really good data point to kind of to determine, what else you might want to do to be competitive for admission. This is one of our handouts, by the way, this evening, and that includes everything, not only the SAT, ACT, but also GPA and some additional admissions information for our current seniors. That Bright Future Scholarship is very popular with our Florida high school students who are choosing to stay in the state of Florida for their post secondary education. And this scholarship can be used at both public and private universities. And one thing that is required for most Bright Futures applicants, there are a few exceptions, but for most students, the majority of students, you are going to need to submit an SAT or ACT score as part of that Bright Futures application. And if I'm working toward the Florida Academic Scholars, which is a fabulous scholarship, it covers 100% of tuition and fees based on a public institution. I need to have either a 1330 on the SAT or a 29 on the ACT. The CLT, by the way, is the classic learning test. It is used for admission and Bright Futures consideration within the state of Florida. Outside of the state of Florida, you would have to look at the list of colleges that accept it. Coming over here to the Florida Medallion Scholars, which covers 75% of tuition and fees, again, based on a public institution, we're looking at SAT scores and other requirements that are going to be a little lower, but still competitive. 1190 for your SAT, 24 for your ACT. And we're going to be covering the Bright Futures Scholarship in a lot greater detail in one of our future webinars, actually at the start of 2026. These are the requirements, by the way, for my current seniors and for my juniors. For my younger students, Bright Futures releases those requirements 2 years out. So my sophomores, my class of 2028, you'll see these requirements published fall of 2026. And then on my screen here are a sample of very popular schools with lots of the students that we work with. Many are test optional, many are test required. And just kind of giving you an idea, US News and World Report, the rankings, as we all know, of course, have their limitations. But what US News and World Report is really good for, I think, is it really helps you find a lot of this information very, very quickly. So you can see admit rates and the data, by the way, or the information provided here, what US News and World Report states or supplies is going to be from the previous year's starting class. So these are going to be based on the admit rates from students who are applying to start fall 2024. And those SAT and ACT figures from those students who enrolled in those universities in the fall of 2024. So again, you can use that again, that PSAT. You're not limited. This is a good starting point. I always tell my students, this is your baseline, but you can use it to start looking at some schools of interest, and colleges also publish, those mid 50% on their websites. And you can look at a school, say like a Dartmouth, that requires test scores and of course has a very low admit rate, one of the more competitive schools in our nation. And you can see what type of SAT, ACT score I might aim to work for if I've got Dartmouth in my sight. So lots of good information here. And again, you can find these published online. You're welcome to grab a screenshot. But this is just to give you a little idea of when we're kind of going back to what makes a good score. And again, a lot of times it's going to depend on the colleges on your list. All right. So let's continue with this discussion and talk about discovering your testing path. So, which direction should you take? So, at the start of the evening, I talked briefly about test optional. There are plenty of colleges out there that are truly test optional. Always read the fine print, though. always take a peek and see what percentage of students submitted scores in the previous cycle. That would give you an idea. Are you going to be at an advantage or at a disadvantage if you're not submitting test scores? And that can vary again from college to college, and just across the country there. SAT, we have talked about at length as well too, because by understanding your PSAT, you have a pretty good grasp on what to expect if you take an SAT later in your junior year and perhaps into the fall of your senior year. So, what about the ACT? So, let's talk about that just pretty quickly here. So, first of all, want to dispel one of those myths that a lot of questions that we get is, does college X prefer SAT or ACT? Does college Y? I heard college Y likes ACT. And the fact of the matter is, colleges treat SAT and ACT exactly the same. Now, they may have some different policies when it comes to super scoring. Sometimes colleges may super score the SAT and not for the ACT. But when we're talking about, an admissions test, pick the one that is going to play to your strengths, where you are going to do the best on. It may be SAT. You may feel really confident after taking your fall PSAT, and that's a test for you. Or you may be a little uncertain and want to explore the ACT. So let's just quickly talk about its features. So the ACT has been in essence the same test for a very, very long time, but in response to the SAT and PSAT's move to digital and basically a complete revamp of those tests, the ACT made its own changes. Now, it's still structurally the same test. It's always going to be 4 sections. I'm not going to count writing as the 5th section because no colleges use that. You're never at any advantage to sign up for it. But when you sit for your your ACT, it starts with English, which is writing, math, reading, and then a science section, which is now optional. That was one of the enhancements. So what ACT did is they now allow for more time for question. It's overall a shorter test, shorter reading and English passages with fewer questions, fewer math questions. The experimental questions are embedded into the test, just like they are for the PSAT and SAT before. I remember I chat with my students after they took a Saturday morning ACT, and they said, "Oh, I had to sit for this random test, and what was that?" And I was like, "Oh, you got an experimental section," but that's now since gone. Students can still choose to take a paper version of the ACT. Indeed, that's why many students have stuck with the ACT. That's why they like it. Or they can take a digital version of the test. It's not adaptive, it's still a linear test. The ACT scores on a 1 through 36 scoring scale, and the composite on the SAT, PSAT, we added up the 2 section scores, and that total score was my SAT score, my PSAT score. The ACT composite score is going to be the average of the English, math, and reading. If you choose to take the science test, it will appear on your score report. Colleges are still going to see it, but it's not going to be averaged into a composite score. Students now have some testing options, right? When they register for the ACT, they can register for the core test, so the English, math, and reading only. They can choose to add the science, or they can choose to add the writing. Don't worry about the writing. I don't think any colleges require it, and if they do, you will know about it. And what this has done, what these changes have done, has brought the timing of the ACT in alignment with the new SAT, PSAT. It's a much shorter test, 2 hours if you're not taking the science and writing, a little bit longer with the science, but it's no longer that 3+ hours. So the question remains, and it's going to remain for a bit longer, is whether or not I should register to take the science test. So What we're seeing is because the science went officially optional as of September 2025. They started in actually April of 2025, rolling out the enhanced ACT where the science was optional, but now if you register for an ACT since September going forward, you'll always be given the option to take the science test. It's optional for many colleges, and some colleges come right out and say, we're not going to use it. We're not going to look at it. Other colleges are saying, if you send it to us, we will use it. When we do our own score recalculation, we will include it if you provide it. For the Bright Future Scholarship, they recently announced that they will calculate both versions of your composite score if you've taken the ACT with science. So they'll do one composite score with English, math, reading. Then they'll do a second composite score with English, math, reading, and science, and they're going to use the higher of the two, whichever is going to, give you the advantage to get the Bright Future. So it's do no harm in essence. What is still unknown is what are the college policies going to look like for the upcoming year? And it's still encouraged, we still encourage our students, especially our students that are looking to major in science, engineering, math, still recommended to take the science. So it's still to your advantage to take the science at least once. That way you have it if you need it. Now, how do I determine which of the tests are going to be better for me? How can I tell if my SAT or ACT which is going to be the best one? So now that I have those PSAT scores in hand, what a lot of juniors will do is they'll sign up for the December ACT or for the February ACT. So that's going to give you a nice side-by-side comparison there. Once you have those scores in hand, is you can use the concordance table to compare and see, okay, which test am I scoring higher on? If you'd like to try a mock exam, you can check out our free simulation site. We do offer monthly SAT and ACT simulations. They are always free. They are virtual. They are with previously, released tests. And this is a nice low risk way in order to, kind of see how the tests compare for you. And especially now that you've taken a PSAT, you might want to see how does that SAT compare. I just talked about scoring for both tests, but just a reminder, the ACT is going to give you a composite score of 1 to 36, and each subsection, each of those sections will get its own 1 through 36 score. The SAT, you're going to get those two scale scores, 200 to 800. Remember, they're a little lower on the PSAT. Add those together, and that's going to give you the total. SAT, PSAT is adaptive. ACT, all questions are worth the same, so it's a linear test. Now, I mentioned using your PSAT scores as a good jumping off point for mapping out future tests. And this is a great time, especially for my juniors. Now, for my younger students, ninth grade, you don't need to worry about, signing up for an SAT and ACT. You still have a lot to learn in your high school classes in order to be prepared to take these tests. Some 10th graders may be ready to try an ACT at the end of sophomore year or an SAT at the beginning of junior year, depending where you are, especially in your math curriculum. You really want to have like that algebra 2 done and in order to do well on those tests. But most students are going to really begin that process of college admission testing in juniors after taking that fall PSAT. So the best dates for juniors to take the ACT and compare that score to the junior PSAT are going to be that upcoming December test and that early February test. And then they have time to test again April, June, and July. And it's really nice if you can get most of your testing done before your senior year, because fall of your senior year is just so busy with college applications and everything else that goes into being a senior in high school. So really nice to get that testing or as close to finish as you can before starting senior year. Now, the 3 tests that are asterisked on my screen are going to be the My Test dates. And what you can do when you register for one of these tests, you'll be given the option to sign up. I don't know how much more it is, but you'll be given, after your scores are released, you'll be given a copy, digital, of course, a copy of your ACT, a copy of the answer key, and then a copy of your answers. So it is a wonderful test prep tool if you're continuing to prepare for future ACTs. Unfortunately, the SAT and the PSAT did away with this feature. The SAT also used to have a few months of its national tests where students could request something similar, but since moving to digital, unfortunately, that is no longer an option. Now, juniors, now that you're done with your PSAT, you might be thinking of taking your first SAT sometime in the spring of your junior year. And indeed, many students, your high school is going to provide a school day SAT for you sometime within the months of March or April. So after you get through your midterms and your fun winter break, starting test prep in January, really it gives you a nice lead up to that first March or even April SAT. And then you have additional opportunities to test May and June. And then seniors, I don't expect to have too many seniors watching tonight's webinar. But if you're in the audience, and certainly for my juniors, if you really like to do some long-term planning, is these are the months in which those two tests are offered in the fall. So you can see SAT has a pretty robust schedule. They added in a September testing date this year, 2025, and you can sit, it's end of August, September, October, November, December, and usually August and September are going to still have scores back in enough time for those very early deadlines, those October 15th, November 1 deadlines. ACT testing is a bit limited in the fall. You get September, October, and December. So just make sure that you plan accordingly. And by the way, even after you submit to an application to a college, you can continue testing. Many times colleges are open to receiving scores. They usually have what's called a materials deadline published, and you can continue testing up until that last date in which they'll receive test scores. Speaking of receiving test scores, the choice is always going to be yours when and how to send. Well, I shouldn't say that. When it's a test optional college, you're always going to have that choice of sending scores. But many of you are going to be applying to colleges that are going to require test scores, or you're going to be wanting to send your scores. So just a few tips, and this is really important for my juniors that might be sitting for an SAT or an ACT coming up this winter or spring. Don't take advantage of the 4 free score reports, because if you add colleges onto those score reports, you are sending scores sight unseen. You might not want to send that 1100 to, Dream College XYZ. Wait until senior year, wait until the start of the senior year to send scores. At that point, you're going to know what your scores are. Even if you are taking a future test, you can submit with the scores that you have and continue to test as long as the college permits it. Colleges typically accept scores one of two ways. They always accept an official SAT or ACT score report. Many colleges allow you to self-report a number of different ways. Always follow each college's requirement about which score sets to send. Most colleges will allow you to send your single best set of scores or the sets of scores that comprise a super score. Some colleges will say, no, we want to see all scores from all test sittings. So always look at the college's requirements. They are published on their admissions site. And as I said earlier, for test optional colleges, the choice about sending scores is going to be yours. And of course, preparing for any test is crucial. Make sure you are studying for those tests. And as always, we would be honored if you consider us for your test prep needs. We offer one-on-one, we offer small group workshops, virtual, in person, we do it all. Just want to quickly highlight, we do have several in-person workshops being offered at some of our area high schools in Palm Beach County, Florida, starting beginning of January. These are going to be Saturday mornings. So these dates have been confirmed, or start dates have been confirmed for Dwyer and Jupiter, still pending confirmation for Suncoast, but should have that available. So for more information, you can reach out to any one of our offices. I'll share our contact information in just a moment. Also, now that you have those PSAT scores back, this is a great time to start planning for college, right? To start researching colleges. Look at those freshman class profiles. Look at the college's testing policy, but just be aware that some schools that are currently test optional may not may be announcing those changes a bit later in the cycle. This is a great opportunity. Again, we've talked a lot about testing, test scores this evening, but also to look at those other pieces, those other factors in college admission. So, what does your GPA look like? What do your courses look like? How about those extracurriculars? This is always a nice point, especially as you are wrapping up that first semester, getting ready to take your midterms, that late December, early January, February time can be a really good moment to sit down and just get that moment of self-reflection. Of course, we offer a lot of great ways that we work with students. Just want to highlight one of our current specials. This is a $99 GPA checkup. You meet with one of our educational consultants, could be with me. And what we do is we recalculate your core GPA like the colleges do. Anne LaFemina gave an amazing presentation on colleges and GPA. I think that was last month. You can watch that recording. We also will help students plan course progression. What are some of the classes that they should be taking throughout high school? And also check your positioning for college admission. We have lots of great webinars recorded and available on our SCORE webinars site. This one will be posted there in the next few days. Check out everything we're offering at scoreatthetop.com. We have come to the question portion of the evening. So I'm going to switch back, but I'll leave my screen up just so you can see all of our contact information. And now I'm going to put on, let me see right here. I'm going to scroll my email. It's heart@scoreatthetop.com. And actually, let me drop it in the chat as well, too. There's a bunch of T's in there. It's heart@scoreatthetop.com. So if anyone has any questions, I invite you to put them in the chat. And if you don't have any questions, then that's okay too. And like I said, you have my email, so you can feel free to reach out. Give it another moment. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, so I will let you all go for this evening. And again, please feel free to reach out if you do have any questions that you think about after my presentation. Wishing everyone if you're here in the US, a very happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your week off from school, as I know many of our students are looking forward to. And then everyone have a great evening. Thank you so much for attending. Bye-bye.